Now it is time for this week's Political Spotlight. And joining me to shine a light is the chair of Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. Greg, welcome on board.
Great
nice
to be here,
see you. Gosh. Right, so Greg, there is so much going on.
Lots of news.
With Donald Trump and everything else like that. It is becoming very, very apparent that even those who would normally be Democrats, or who are Democrats, are looking at this and going, hold on a minute, this isn't right.
Right.
Even the Democrats. So talk to me about what is... start me off with kind of the White House and the whole thing with the interference with the Russian elections and all that stuff. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. For all their talk about election interference, this is the ultimate election interference. Rather than letting the people decide, the voters decide, they're using the justice system. They're essentially weaponizing the justice system and the courts to influence the election or even prevent President Trump from running for re-election or at least from becoming president again. Now, right now, they're pumping him up. They know these indictments and these cases help him with the Republican primary process. So he's getting more support, sympathy from Republicans when they view him as a martyr. They see, even if you don't like Trump, even if you supported someone else at the beginning of the nomination process, when you see the weaponization, when you see the unequal application of the justice system, and it's really Trump derangement syndrome gone wild. That's created a lot of sympathy for Trump. So you saw a lot of support move, for example, from Governor DeSantis to President Trump after these indictments started.
Yeah.
So it is the ultimate election interference. They have a much greater influence even on the nomination process in addition to the general. So this is, and again, it all started back in 2016 with the Russia collusion hoax. And so that's what they're talking about the last few days, this file that went missing that really probably exposed a lot of who actually created the hoax. Now, we know it came from the Hillary Clinton campaign, and we know that the FBI was involved and the CIA was involved. So this was not only weaponization of justice, but it's weaponization of the intelligence agencies. It's really sad to see. Now, the institutions ultimately worked because it was uncovered, but once you start repeating the hoax or repeating a lie, if you say it often enough, people actually believe it.
They do,
now, it's
yes.
been completely debunked and proven that it was a hoax, and again, proven that it came from the Hillary Clinton campaign.
So the hoax is, just to remind people of what
Yes.
the hoax is.
That was the fabrication of this idea that President Trump was working with the Russians and colluding with the Russians to affect the outcome of the 2016 election. Now, it's since been proven to be just that, a hoax, and it's on the Clinton campaign. They paid for the Steele dossier, which came from a former British intelligence officer, but a complete and utter fabrication, and yet 50% of the American electorate thinks it happened, because they repeated it enough for 2 years. So when it was finally disproven, people are just moving on to the next topic.
So what's going on with Mayor Giuliani then, Rudy Giuliani? Because he's been asked to pay $148.1 million.
Yes,
I mean,
not a small fine.
Who's going to help him pay for that? He's rich. Is he rich? Because he doesn't even care. He doesn't sound like he cares.
It's never going to happen. And he'll appeal, of course. And this is just a little bit of silliness. I mean, putting that kind of a fine, on a case like that where he said mean things about some people, it's really obscene. The free speech protection in the U.S. is a little bit more intense than it is here in the UK. So it's really difficult to sue for libel. And that's really what happened. This is another Trump derangement syndrome moment. That's not to say that Giuliani didn't have some rough days back in 2020. I mean, here was the former Time Magazine Man of the Year, Mr. Mayor. He was a really loved figure in the early 2000s. And it was sad to see him, sort of almost make a fool of himself toward the end, the Four Seasons landscaping moment, the dye dripping down his head. Not a great moment.
What
That's
happened there?
probably
What
enough.
happened there, the Four Seasons?
Well, he called a press conference, and so a lot of the press thought, oh, Four Seasons, it's the hotel in Philadelphia. No, it was Four Seasons landscaping. So it was just a really bad look. It's the only place they could get. And so, he made some calls that he probably regrets, trying to accuse people of, voting machine violations and stuffing ballots. It's the old argument, only really accuse people of what you can prove and what you have photos of.
Well, it says the damages included nearly 16.2 million and 17 million in compensatory damages for Freeman and Moss, who...
That's a little bit ridiculous.
These are the people who he sort of blamed and said...
Yeah.
But what, so was there no truth in some of that vote rigging?
Oh.
I mean, because from what we've seen, it does seem some of the things were a bit odd that happened.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it took some time to figure out what really swung the election. So if you just, I mean, I don't want to call it fraud, but if you look at voting irregularities, let's say, clearly the censorship of the New York Post articles about the Hunter Biden laptop, that clearly had an effect on the election. 30% of the people who did not know about it and would have changed their vote if they did. So that's probably the most obvious. Then you had the Zucker bucks. There were a lot of the changes of the Pennsylvania and Michigan laws before the election that didn't go through the legislative process. These are all unconstitutional. So, there was some flaws. And it's just that at the time they were looking for the low-hanging fruit, which would have been, a photograph of someone stuffing ballots or, a real, problem with the voting machines. But that didn't really materialize. And I think it made them look a little foolish.
Yeah, because it did feel like something odd happened.
Oh, shutting down the counting.
There was
1 in the morning for 3 hours.
And then one went closed, and then suddenly when Trump was definitely ahead, they stopped counting.
Yeah,
and it's like, come on. And it was postal voting mainly as well.
And that was a big thing. And I think the Republicans have to get smarter on that. If mail-in voting is now the law, then you have to take advantage of it and do your own ballot harvesting and your own gathering of mailing out ballots, all that stuff that was so new back then. And the Republicans were so busy saying, vote on election day, that's what we always do. And some people just didn't want to. And so the mail-in ballots really favored the Democrats. So there was a lot of funny business, but again, it's hard to prove. And that's the problem with fraud, is it's really difficult to prove.
But it's brazen as well, so it's clear that something went on, but you've actually got to prove what that thing was.
Right.
So it's not as though, you think, something, it's clear that something's gone on, it's not right. But I don't know how they, Trump was obviously, in my view, he's right. Something happened with that election. I don't know what happened. They've done it in a way that you couldn't prove it either way.
And you knew they would. I mean, they will stop at nothing. I mean, they're really driven, the Democrats. And they did it again in the midterms. Again, I'm not saying it was cheating.
I wouldn't have thought they'd have gone so far, though. And even now, even when you can hear that what they're saying, the way they're attacking Trump through the judiciary and through any other, anything, coming up with absolutely anything.
Yeah, it's their old 1968 argument, by any means necessary.
But they don't care that we can see it, we're calling it out.
They just want to win.
They just want to win. And what with Joe Biden then, because he's in a bit of a dilemma with Ukraine.
He really is.
Talk to people about what that means.
So he's advocating for more funding for Ukraine. And the Republicans are okay with that. The Senate, the Republicans in the Senate, like Mitch McConnell, the minority leader, he's all for it. Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, he's actually, he was a little bit averse to it when he was a backbencher. As soon as he became the leader, he flipped on it. He's endorsed more support for Ukraine, also for Israel and Taiwan. But they also have a real national security problem at the border with Mexico. It's an open border, and that's 100% due to Biden's preference for open borders, and he's really following the lead of the open border faction, the radical, progressive, militant faction in his own party. But he's polling at 23 on the border. So this could be a win-win for Biden. First of all, they're not unrelated issues. To say that, there's criticism of the Republicans for tying in Ukraine funding to the border funding and border policies, but they're both national security issues. And so this could be a double win for Biden. He could get the Ukraine funding. That's a win for him, even whether or not you're, for that or have some concerns about it. But you have, an opportunity to fix the problem at the border, which you're polling at 23 on. So, he's afraid to offend the radical left wing of his party that wants open borders. There's 8 million illegal asylum seekers that have come into the country. By the end of the Biden administration, unless he changes course, there'll be 10 million. It's a huge number. It's creating a humanitarian crisis for those very people, but also for the people who live in the border towns, and then to the cities where they're shipping a lot of the illegals, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, and you're even getting pushback from the Democratic mayors. So
wasn't that something that DeSantis did, though, to sort of...
Yeah, he said
that was DeSantis, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a brilliant move. He sent 50 of the illegals to Martha's Vineyard, which is the summer capital for the Democratic Party and the left. And, of course, they couldn't tolerate it. Once they had them in their own backyard, they had 100 National Guardsmen from Cape Cod Naval Base come over to the island and take the immigrants back to the Cape, because they just couldn't stand it. And not in Martha's Vineyard, of course not.
Well, we need to send some to Gary Lineker. I'll be talking about him in a couple of moments' time, actually.
That would be wise.
He needs to sort of see what he's talking about, because I don't think he gets it. Well, listen, Hansel has been in touch, because we asked people to get in touch via gbviews@gbnews.com. Hansel says, bring back Donald Trump. He'll sort out the world's problems. In his last term, no wars were started. Luckily, I think the US system will allow him to serve 2 more terms.
Well, he can't serve 2 terms, actually, but
can he do, because he's done 1,
he's done
can he only
one
do 1
already.
extra,
So
or can
the
he
limit
do 2
is
more?
2. Yeah, it's
so
just
2 in total,
yeah, whether it's
irrespective of winning.
contiguous or not.
No.
But he's got a point. If people, even if you don't miss Trump, the personality, you miss the peace and prosperity of 2019.
I miss the humour. I miss Twitter. I miss him on Twitter, actually.
He's entertaining, and he's got quite the personality, and it's great for the media business, that's for sure. But people really do miss the peace and prosperity. So you can make that argument that that what he did, not what he said, or not what the press said he said, but what he actually did had phenomenal outcomes, for not just for America, but for the world.
Well, also the Middle East, because he kept peace
Absolutely.
there. And look at what's happened now.
Is probably the most obvious. But for the first 2 years of the Biden administration, the staffers were not permitted to use the term Abraham Accords, because they thought that would be a nod to the success of Trump. So anything that Trump did that was successful, they either denied or just ignored it. And I think if it wasn't for that, you might have seen an agreement between the Israelis and the Saudis occur before we've had all this drama in the last few months. So
well, Biden's
it's really too bad.
Well, Joe Biden's not really all there, is he? I mean, I'm sure he's on maybe some sort of medication to keep him sort of as he is. I mean, that's just just looking at him, that's what I'm
He works
working
2
out.
hours a day, and I'm not sure he'll mention today that it's the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party.
Oh, right.
And someone will have to really walk him through that, because he might not remember. Although he might have been alive at that point.
He probably was. But as opposed to what now?
Yeah, barely.
He's sort of... It's really odd, though, because people are talking about him coming in for a 2nd term.
Right.
That's madness. That's not going to happen, is it? It's not gonna happen.
I don't think so. I mean,
it can't happen.
Right now, he wants to be the candidate. Nobody can talk him out of it. But I think as we get closer to the election, if they see Trump, or if it's another candidate, it looks like Trump now, but if they see Trump polling 5 or 10 points ahead of him, especially in the swing states, they'll pull him. They'll do the Bernie Sanders trick. The same trick they pulled on Bernie, which was basically pushing Bernie aside and making Joe the candidate in 2020. They'll do that to Biden. They'll have to, because he's not capable of...
So then briefly, can Trump win? Yes or no? Do you think he can?
Can he win? Yes. Will he win? Impossible to say. And these polls, don't believe the polls. The mainstream media, the progressive left, they want you to think that Trump is polling really well against Biden and against his Republican opponents, because they want him to be the candidate. They think he's the only one they can beat. So they'll do their best to make him the nominee, and then they'll turn on him. And they'll just put everything they have against Trump. They'll elevate Trump derangement syndrome.
Well, listen, Greg, it's lovely to talk to you.
Great to be here, Nana. Thank you.
Talk to you. That's, of course, Greg Swenson.